Just give us a sense. The scale of this storm is incredible. When FEMA is facing something that's impacting this many states, how much of a challenge is it to get material and equipment in place before it arrives?
Joe, you're right. This is a gigantic storm. And when I look at the maps, it covers 7 of FEMA's 10 regions, right? That's
Wow.
two-thirds of all of the FEMA regions are going to be impacted by this, close to 200 million people. And that's where FEMA has the ability to have these centralized stockpiles of equipment ready to move out to states as they identify any needs. And so the goal here is to pre-position where you can, especially areas that are going to get a lot of snow, because once the snow comes in, it's going to be harder to move those in. But they only do that at the request of the state. And as the states are putting their plans in place, they can request these resources from FEMA. They can move those in. These are things like generators, because it is going to be a prolonged power outage. But things like blankets or food and water to help stock some of the shelters. All of that activity is happening right now, and they'll continue to work through the weekend with each of the states that are impacted to get them what they need.
Yeah. We're watching shares of Generac and Cat both head lower today, interestingly, knowing that there's going to be massive demand for generators. We've been having a specific conversation about Texas, of course, Deanne, for good reason. And you know a lot about what happened in Texas in 2001. As we remind everybody, that took place shortly before you were sworn in as FEMA Administrator in April of 2021. So you essentially had to help clean all of this up. I'm wondering what recommendations you made to Texas and if they were received, knowing that Texas has an independent grid.
Yeah, one of the biggest things is first helping to educate the public, right? And I think you heard a lot of that already with your last speaker, right? How do you get people to understand what is going to happen to them and that this is going to be a prolonged power outage so they can take the steps right now to make sure that they can keep themselves and their families safe. But then the second part of that is, how do you harden that grid? How do you put mitigation measures in place to reduce the impact? You're not going to get rid of the impact completely. And I know that we worked with Texas and we worked with the power companies to, work through the different programs that the Department of Energy has or that FEMA has and which ones are eligible, to create systems that can protect those exposed power lines during a storm like this. But you're never going to stop it completely. And so they have to work hand in hand, those private utilities with the local emergency management, the state emergency management, so they can do everything they can to get the power restored to those critical infrastructure facilities first, and then get everything else back online. But it does take time. And that's why people need to act today, and they need to act now to make sure they have what they need.
I have to ask you about manpower at FEMA, and I don't want to get too political with you here, Deanne, but the fact of the matter is the Federal Emergency Management Agency had to halt planned terminations of some temporary disaster relief workers because of the storm. I don't know if these people will be let go after the storm, but following the changes that we've seen at FEMA since the Trump administration came back into Washington, and knowing that there's been a lot of push and pull over the role that FEMA should be playing versus the states, does the agency have the people it needs?
Well, they certainly are down staff, right? They've already lost several thousand people, and that creates a strain on the existing personnel that are still there. You have people that are stationed at headquarters that are working in the National Response Coordination Center right now, preparing for this storm, working with our federal partners like the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense, and others. But you also have personnel in the regions, and these folks in the regions are the ones that are connecting directly with the state directors. But with the loss of staff, it just makes it harder. It makes it harder to keep up with the demand, with the requests, and helping to support those communities. And I think as we continue to see potential changes in the emergency management enterprise and more financial responsibility going to state and locals, then I can see you could start scaling back some of the staff at FEMA. But I'm hopeful that what they saw with the onset of this storm is not going to be any different than maybe an onset during hurricane season, is that until all of those changes are made and more responsibility, financial responsibility is assumed at the state and local level, you still need those federal people to help implement those programs. And so it just takes time to make those kind of changes. And when you indiscriminately don't renew some of these contracts without understanding the role that they play, it just makes longer recoveries, longer support for the American people that need help when they need it most.
Well, it certainly makes sense. FEMA lost more than 3,700 employees, about 14% of the agency last year, thanks to the federal workforce cuts. The ones we're talking about here, on-call response recovery employees, CORE, the cadre of on-call response recovery employees. Some have multi-year contracts. Will we see more contractors as full-timers are shown the door?
Well, I think it's kind of a misnomer, and I just want to clarify there.
Yeah.
So this cadre of on-call response employees, they are on 2-year or 4-year appointments. These are federal employees just through a different hiring authority. They're not contractors in the sense where you see private sector firms coming in. And so typically they're on for 2 years or 4 years, and every 2 years or 4 years, then that appointment gets renewed. If you continue to not renew those appointments, you're losing critical staff. These are the people that make up the core, the heartbeat of the disaster response reporters directly in the field with a state or a local jurisdiction or in a regional office. When you lose those personnel, you lose not just numbers, but you lose knowledge, you lose institutional knowledge, you lose expertise, and all of that takes time to rebuild. And so as they continue to lose those, you can't replace them with just hiring new cadre of on-call core employees, right? Because it'll still take time to get them up to speed. And you certainly can't replace them with private sector contractors to come in, but there's a difference there. And I just want to make sure that was clear. And it's really going to impact FEMA's ability to support communities before, during, and after disasters if they continue to lose those disaster employees.
Yeah.